Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of CPS Peace Conference, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce to all of you our first speaker today, Dr. Mattias Dahlkvist. Let me just read out a brief profile on him. Dr. Mattias Dahlkvist is a senior lecturer in the history of religion at the University of Linköping, PhD at Umeå University, Sweden, in the scientific study of religion. His research interests focus on Islam and globalization and the arrival of Islam and Muslims in relation to traditions of Christianity and secular culture in Scandinavia. Dr. Dahlkvist teaches the study of religion with a focus on Islam, especially in India. Also teaches at both the bachelor's and master's level Judaism, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, the history of non-violent conflict, and the sociology of religion. Dr. Mattias, our heartfelt thanks to you. You came all the way from Sweden to be a participant at CPS Peace International Conference. I also, on behalf of CPS, acknowledge all your efforts in terms of introducing our founder, Maulana Wahiduddin Khan Saab's ideology to many of the, upcoming research scholars. And I remember Dr. Mattias used to come from Sweden to spend time with Maulana Saab and, with this questionnaire. And Maulana particularly, he had great appreciation, for your sincerity, for your dedication. And we all felt, in those meetings that there was a connect heart to heart with you. You are our brother, Dr. Mattias. And on behalf of Center for Peace and Spirituality family, we welcome you to Delhi, to CPS conference. And I remember in one of the last interactions, you told Maulana that, your voice should go to the global community, and therefore you should do your live Sunday talks in English, if you remember. So Maulana, in a lighter mode, said that, yes, I will do in English, provided you watch them live. And Dr. Mattias, we are happy to tell you that we have more than 100 lectures of Maulana Sahab in English now. So, and one of the reason is, you're asking him to do it in English. So thank you so much. CPS family welcomes you. And with this, I invite you to come here and begin your talk. Dr. Mattias Dahlkvist.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very honored to be here among friends. And I will do this talk. I will try to be as personal as I can, because this is also a way to remember Maulana Wahiduddin Khan. So I will try to talk a little about my personal experiences. But toward the end, I will become more academic, more scholarly, perhaps, torture you a little. So please have a little patience, please. Sabr. I will try and do 3 things at this lecture. Or I don't want to call it a lecture, because we're not having exams towards the end. But let's try and make it a dialogue. I will try to converse about 3 things. How about learning the thought of Maulana Wahiduddin Khan in context. I will tell you something about teaching the thought of Maulana Wahiduddin Khan in context. context. What does that mean in Scandinavia, in Sweden, in Europe? And for me as a university teacher. And towards the end, that's where I'm becoming more scholarly, perhaps, or more academic. I will try to say a few things about applying the thought of Maulana Wahiduddin Khan in context. So we have these different contexts. All right. I was asked, how did this all begin? Why did you write a book or make a PhD thesis about Maulana Wahiduddin Khan? It began in 2010 when me and my then supervisor, Professor Thomas Lindgren at Umeå University, we had this very popular course, a class called Religion, Fundamentalism and Violence. And honestly, it was so popular. We had hundreds of students. We were tired of only talking about religion, fundamentalism, and violence. Oh, excellent. Thank you so much. We wanted to talk about the other side of religion, the one that is not often talked about in European secular culture, in Scandinavian secular culture. We wanted to highlight that. We wanted to highlight religion, nonviolence, and peace building. So we started another class, and that became very popular as well. The class Religion, Nonviolence, and Peace Building. And through that literature, that's how I encountered Maulana Wahiduddin Khan and started reading his works and mentioning him in class, in teaching, as an important example of a contemporary Muslim scholar of Islam, peace, and nonviolence. And the class was very popular. And that awareness created the foundation for the research project. I wanted to write a PhD thesis about nonviolence and peace building in Islam. And that began in 2012. So I had the idea that I wanted to write about nonviolence and peace building in Islam from as many contexts as possible. I wanted to write about it from Thailand, in Palestine and the US, and in India, mentioning Maulana Wahiduddin Khan. Now, these examples, and I could mention other Muslim contemporary scholars, what I found was their writings were few and they were quite short, but not so with Maulana Wahiduddin Khan. But I still had this in mind, sometimes Maulana Wahiduddin Khan told us that your mind tends to get stuck. And that's where I was. I was so focused on that research project. Anyways, thanks to Rajat and the other members of the CPS, I began my interviews with Maulana Wahiduddin Khan in December 2013. And I will tell you have a little patience, please. I will tell you a little more about that particular experience. And the interviews were so rich that I decided, okay, I need more answers. I need more. There's so much here. So I decided to come back. So I went back to Delhi in 2014 for another round of interviews. And like Rajat said, I personally felt that the interviews were very rich. It was an engaging dialogue with Maulana Wahiduddin Khan. So after the second round of interviews, I decided I will focus my research only on Maulana Wahiduddin Khan. So between 2000 and 2016, all I did was to read the texts of Maulana Wahiduddin Khan, everything I could find. And you all know this. There are hundreds of books and articles. And I had to decide to use what sources in the contemporary period, because CPS was starting to broadcast Maulana Wahiduddin Khan's IDs in different venues. For instance, the live talks through the web page. Do you remember those? I participated in one of those on one Sunday morning in Delhi in December 2013. But I decided that interviews and the English text of Maulana Wahiduddin Khan, that's what I was going to focus on. And that's the source material, main source material used for my book about Maulana. But, okay, so I was trying to grasp, I was trying to understand the message. I engaged with this message, but I felt there was something missing. I felt that I couldn't understand it. And for research, I needed an analytical point of view. And I realized I have to understand his message in a context. So I had to learn what amounted to two related contexts. I had to understand the Indian context of debate over Islam, the public debate over Islam, different Muslim interpreters of Islam, and who and what positions were Maulana engaging with? Who was he addressing? While I was writing, I more and more understood that his audience, the context he was addressing, was becoming more and more global. So the research was changing as I was doing it. Because it was not only the Indian context, but it was more and more the global context. So between 2016 and 2019, I was not only trying to understand the history of Islam in India, that is from the modern period, from the 1700s, and the following development of Hindu-Muslim relations in India, but I was also more and more trying to understand the global significance. How is Islam perceived in the world? So on the one hand, I understood that there's an Indian and a global anti-Muslim agitation. And in my analysis, I found that Maulana was addressing the anti-Muslim ideology and by presenting the authentic Islam the way he saw it. And on the other hand, Maulana was addressing the actual instances of Indian and global Muslim terrorist attacks and how to counter these influences, both from the perspective of both trying to change Muslims, but also trying to address non-Muslims in India and the world. All right. So I came back to Delhi for a third round of interviews. And in 2016, I had what amounted to 6 interviews with Maulana for a total of 18 hours of interview material. And at the dissertation defense, the faculty opponent, Jan Järpe, he's the most famous scholar of Islamic studies in India, and in Sweden, and he's the dean of Islamic studies in Sweden. He told me, so you spent 20 hours with your questions of a more than a 90-year-old man? What's wrong with you? And he was right, of course. But on the other hand, I felt that what happened when I had the possibility to interview Maulana was, what happened to me personally was I got excited. I got excited because he was someone who excelled in logic. And his children and grandchildren and those of you who knew him well will have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that his personality was, or his psychology was oriented around logic and ideas. I think his main interest was ideas. And there's some research, some psychology research about this, that there's a certain very small number of people, about 2% of the population, who are mainly oriented around ideas and logic and originality. So the way I understand his development as a thinker, for instance, in his youth, he engaged with a secular materialist philosophy of Bertrand Russell, the British philosopher. Now that's a mind who is oriented around originality. That is, one wants to engage with original ideas and try to work it out. And of course, logic, originality, knowledge, intelligence, those all goes together in this kind of personality. However, I think knowledge was more the basis for formulating the ideas and for formulating and engaging with original ideas. And why are some people engaged with or driven by ideas and logic? Well, I think in the case of Maulana Wahiduddin Khan, and why I think that those interviews went very well, is that Maulana's purpose, and once again, please correct me if I'm wrong, was the pursuit of truth. I believe Maulana was obsessed with the pursuit of truth. And I mean obsessed in the most neutral sense of the word. And why is someone obsessed with truth? Well, this is my personal reflection, and you don't have to agree with me. I think truth points upwards, points to the divine. So knowledge, in the case of Maulana, I think that was a tool for him in the pursuit of truth. Hence, understanding the divine, understanding what was the purpose of the Creator, what Maulana called the creation plan of God. And I don't hesitate to be very personal, and Maulana wrote a lot about and discussed with me during these interviews about the importance of introspection, about reflection, and through that process is growing through purification, tazkiyah. And now he never mentioned exactly what is introspection, exactly what is reflection. But I have the good fortune to have two people in my life who are my internal points of reflection. And one is my deceased grandmother, and the other is Maulana. And I meet their faces in portraits every day I enter my study. And this, just meeting their faces, remembering the deceased ones is a point of reference for me. They nudge me. It's like a presence. And I don't know what paradise is. I don't know what Jannah is. But it nudges me onward, corrects me when I'm not on the path of righteousness, and applauds me or smiles at me. My grandmother, in my own personal psychological experience, Maulana smiles at me when I'm on the path to righteousness, and he nudges me or frowns at me when I'm being less than what I can be. So I think he was right that it is only through the processes of introspection and reflection, and therefore growing in purification. And I think he's right when these processes are necessary to develop a peaceful personality. And I struggled with his concept of human nature and positivity. I struggled with it when I did my research, because I wanted to know exactly what did he mean. I wanted to know exactly what did he mean with every concept. And I felt positivity was the most difficult one for some reason. Now it's totally clear to me. But at the time I wanted to understand what did it mean with positivity and how it's related to Al-Hadith and the Quran. And I think it's through these processes of introspection and reflection. And he told me every day there's some point of introspection and reflection. And I asked him what? And he said, well, that's my own personal business. And between him and God. Okay, so with those personal experiences, I will end the first part about learning the thought of Maulana Wahiduddin Khan in context, and instead say something about teaching the thought of Maulana Wahiduddin Khan in context. Now, I'm a university teacher, I'm a senior lecturer. I meet in total some 300 students every year. And my main opportunity to talk about the thought of Maulana is in a large class at Linköping University that is called Introduction to Islam. So that's a large class every fall. I also have another class called Introduction to the History of Religions. It's very not satisfying. It's an introduction to Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, and Buddhism. So it's all in one. But what's important about that class is that it's a seminal beginner's class. And it starts the semester. So that is the first thing that students of religion will meet. And what I do always during these classes is that we work our way through Islamic history and lexicon, through the times of the Prophet Muhammad and the developments in the medieval period, and trying to formulate and understand the main challenges of the modern period. So by the time we reach the contemporary period, the students know about the central Islamic Arabic lexicon. They know about the differences between ibadat and muamalat. They know about, of course, the 5 pillars of Islam, but trying to understand it from an inside perspective. And then when we get to the contemporary period, I can present the thought of Maulana Wahiduddin Khan. and allow them to pass their own judgment on how they perceive it. Now I should say that this is called the scientific study of religion. Hence, it is meant to be ideally neutral, ideally objective. It's a secular science. Strange, huh? A secular science of religion. But that's the ideal. And that's the spirit in which I teach Maulana's thought and ideology. And it makes it, I think, that is also the spirit in which I wrote the book. And in that spirit, I think it makes it less possible to dismiss his teachings. Strange enough, huh? Because if I had been a CPS member, my teaching could always have been dismissed. That is a partisan view. But you can see where my sympathies lie just by highlighting his example when we reach the contemporary period in these large classes of Islamic studies. I also have a lot of, well, let me say something about the students groups. First, we have the students in the general study of religion. We also have theology students. That's a large section of our students. And they are training to become priests in the Protestant Lutheran Church of Sweden. And so I think that's a great thing, that they are trained in the scientific study of religion. And they meet as priests, as becoming priests in the Church of Sweden. They meet the thought of Maulana Wahiduddin Khan. I think that's very important. The third student category that I meet every year is our teacher students. Now, they are trained in religious education as a school subject. And this needs to be commented. Religious education. So that is a part of the high school curriculum in Sweden and in most Scandinavian countries and many European countries. So the ideal of religious education is to give an objective information, facts about religion, but it's also to foster democratic, enlightened citizens, so who are knowledgeable about religions, and to minimize religion as a source of discrimination and hatred among Swedes, because Sweden is now an historically unprecedented pluralistic society. And I will say it's a little more about that. But religious education as a school subject is ideally secular, objective, balanced, is focused on world religions and comparative religion. So all Swedish students have this as a school subject. And I'm very proud of the teacher students that I meet each year, because they in turn meet hundreds of pupils every year in their professional lives. And I always try to remember them about the importance of Maulana and as a way to understand Islam in the contemporary times. Now, I don't want to exaggerate my own importance in this, but I'm very proud because I think that that is my contribution to Swedish society. And indirectly, I have an effect of the Swedish school system and hundreds of Swedish school students, pupils, will have some knowledge about Maulana Wahiduddin Khan. And we will see what the long-term effects of that will be. Okay, so just shortly, one quick example. Currently, I'm supervising 6 master students, and one of them, he writes his master thesis, and he's becoming a school teacher. They have 5.5 years of training. Like I said, they combine their religion's education subject with another topic, typically Swedish, typically history or geography. And his master's thesis is about the thought of Maulana Wahiduddin Khan in relation to the official religious education curriculum and teacher practice. Because what does objective, nuanced, multifaceted, and balanced religious education means when school teachers discuss Islam in the Swedish school education? What does it mean? What do teachers in Swedish schools highlight about Islam? Should they simply avoid Muslim fundamentalism, terrorism? That's a very contentious issue in Swedish society and in Europe. So what does balance mean? What does nuance mean? What does multifaceted mean? And the main objective is that to investigate in what way does teaching Swedish high school students improve their objective understanding about Islam and also fulfills the mandatory state-governed religious education curriculum. Okay. I will not talk anymore about teaching. I will instead move on to the third part, applying the thought of Maulana Wahiduddin Khan in context. So I will say just something very brief about Sweden, because Sweden has quickly developed from the most homogeneous people in the world. That was based in the Church of Sweden experience, where everyone had their church attendance and the mass said in Swedish. So 99% of the population in Sweden talked Swedish in 1900. 99% of the population. And this has changed in only 3 decades, because Sweden have received the most refugees in relation to its population through asylum migration than any other country in the world, ever, in world history. And we don't know what that will mean. Nobody knows. We don't know what the historical trajectory will be. So this is comparable to Norway and Denmark, our fellow Scandinavian countries. It is very comparable to the experience of Germany, that have received more refugees, mainly from Muslim-majority countries. But relative to its population, Sweden have received more refugees. Okay. Now that is the background to understand something very contentious, a very contentious issue in contemporary Sweden that I would like to spend some time about. So last spring, there was a Danish right-wing extremist who does not like immigrants, and he does not like Muslims. And he wanted to prove that Muslims are reactive, that Muslims are prone to violence, through burning the Quran. And therefore prove that Muslims or Islam are unable to deal with democracy in modern society. Now this can be compared with the situation in India, of course. Okay, I don't want to highlight this man, Rasmus Paludan, the Danish political activist. But it's so obvious to me, just looking at this man, that this is a nobody. This is a nobody. Nobody should care about what he has to say. He didn't even care to bring a real Quran. That's a Penguin Classics edition. So when I heard about this, I thought about Maulana. If there is a problem, simply ignore it. What do you think happened? Unfortunately, Muslims in inner city areas raged, and there were huge riots in several Swedish cities. Now we haven't had a riot for 20 years when left-wing activists came to Sweden in 2001 for the World Economic Forum. So these images were broadcasted to every Swede, and this reinforced the image of Swedes of how Islam is, what Muslims are like. Now, I would like to say that the police is generally very popular in Sweden. I teach at the police academy. They're very democratic, they're very friendly, they're not racist. So these images horrified the Swedish public. Because the activist, the Danish activist, he had sought permission to have that kind of activities. And the police is forced by law to defend any demonstration with a permit. So, how to react to the so-called Easter riots of 2022? Well, it's obvious to me that it was a trap. And the certain Muslims of Sweden took the bait, like fish to a hook or birds in a net. Now, one insightful member of the CPS told me in 2016 that Sweden, and perhaps myself, was too kind to the Muslims. I wasn't sure at the time, but I'm sure this time, and I won't make the same mistake again. I have to say, stupid Muslims. Stupid. Because I felt that my effort as a university teacher to try to deepen the understanding of Islam as something that may lead to truth, that points to the divine. That's what I said. And my efforts to create a more harmonious Swedish society. Because now we are a pluralist society. And we have to find a way to move together into this future experience. Find a way to have unity. And if we do that and cooperate, who knows how good it can get. But the images that I just show you deeply disturb the largely immigrant and Muslim-friendly Swedish opinion. If the Swedish general public weren't agreeable to immigrants and to the presence of Muslims in our society, we wouldn't have had that huge, mainly Muslim, but also other religious minorities from the Middle East. We wouldn't have all that immigration. And that also developed into a political international campaign to smear Sweden in general, and that was directed through Turkey, that in Sweden they allowed the burning of the Quran, which is, I think, deeply disturbing, of course. But the whole campaign was built on an inability or unwillingness to understand freedom of expression and democracy in Sweden. You could burn the Bible in Sweden if you'd like. You could burn a book by Mattias Dahlkvist, or you could burn a portrait of the King of Sweden. This is an actual portrait of the King of Sweden by a famous art photographer. Funny. And I would like to talk to you a lot more about applying the thought of Maulana Wahiduddin Khan in relation to developments within academia that is sometimes called, and this is a strange word, sometimes called postmodernism. It is called critical theory. That is the last thing that I would like to leave you with. But time flies. We need to move on. And I want us to move on to the questions. But I would just like to leave you all with these notions, but applying the thought of Maulana Wahiduddin Khan in context. So accept his general notion to, if there is a problem, simply ignore it, as a message to, a reasonable, rational message to the Muslims of Sweden in that particular context when they were being obviously baited by political activists. We know, because Maulana reminds us from Surah 41:34, good and evil deeds are not equal. Repel evil with what is better, then you will see that one who was your enemy has become your dearest friend. In essence, this is positivity. This is what I didn't want to understand in 2013 or 2014 when my mind was too square or rigid. So that is the positive mindset, the positive status quoism. And that goes against a negative psychology. What I didn't want to understand or couldn't understand at the time. What did it mean, negativity? The negativity leads to hate and violence, and there's no end to it. And the desire for vengeance. So, in short, Maulana reminds us, one-sided good behavior is immensely persuasive, and it is a God-given asset. Now, what does that mean? Well, from a Muslim perspective, the way I understand Maulana, that means that gentleness have divine blessing, carry divine blessing. But I think it's also rationally true, empirically true. And he also says that in the modern times, in the contemporary times, the modern conditions provide endless possibilities for Muslims, for nonviolence, for nonviolent action. But not only for Muslims, for everyone. We go through darkness. This is a dark time. Especially for us in Northern Europe, with the war in Ukraine. But this is still the best time to be human, and I'll prove it to you very quickly. If you ever come to Sweden, I would love to show you some of our national monuments. This is the famous Läckö Castle, one of the most famous examples of Baroque architecture from the 1600s in Sweden. Now you're all thinking, okay, that's nothing compared to Taj Mahal or the Red Fort. That's okay. That's not the point here. If we ever go there, we will find that this was built by one of the most powerful and rich noble families in the 1600s. And they have these beds with canopies. Have you seen those beds? With drapes around and a roof over. And everyone goes, all the romantics in here go, oh, canopy beds. That's so nice. Do you know why they had canopies? Canopy beds? Anyone? So the bed bugs wouldn't fall from the roof, or rats wouldn't climb up in your bed when you sleep. So even if you were the richest man in Europe or Sweden, belonging to the most powerful family, you would still have to contend with that. You would still have to contend with the water that gives you cholera and the food that gives you dysentery. So obviously, the modern period is the best time to be alive, and Maulana reminded us of that. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your patience.
Dr. Mattias, that was really a wonderful talk. Thank you so much. I would say that in between, I kept looking back at the audience and everybody was mesmerized, listening to you very intently. And also, you sort of brought out some of the very important aspects that Maulana kept emphasizing all his life. Stay positive, don't have hate in your heart, and the positive aspect that one should, imbibe in one's life. So truly thankful. I think it was not just a lecture, Dr. Mattias, it was also a tribute to him. Dr. Mattias, Maulana has been, he's always been a proponent of interfaith dialogue, and particularly in the Christian world, he participated in many of the important events globally. One of the things that we wanted to ask you was that, in your opinion, what is the advice that you would give to the Muslim world, that how can they strengthen the Muslim-Christian relations?
All right. It's, you're asking an academic, and I've already talked so much, but let me begin by being very scholarly and say, just like Christians have to separate who are the Muslims we're talking about, not homogenize Muslims. All Muslims are the same. Islam is all the same. Muslims are programmed robots by Islam. You know very well that there are differences between Muslims, just as Christians know that there are differences between Christians. So the obvious, first obvious answer to your question would be you have to separate, of course, between the main three dimensions of Christianity, Catholics, Protestants, and the Orthodox Church. Now, I'm not an expert in the Orthodox Church in Russia or the Greek Orthodox tradition, so I will talk mainly about the Protestant and the Catholic Church in the world. What you will find is that the Northern European Protestant churches are very accommodating to Muslims. And they are very interested in Muslim scholars like Maulana and accommodating to Islam. That is part of why the countries that I mentioned in Scandinavia, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, are generally very agreeable or friendly towards immigrants and Muslims. Now, when we talk about the Catholic Church, there's a huge difference between people at the general level and the theologians and the bishops and the cardinals of the church. Because the theologians and leaders of the Catholic Church, they are based in the theology of what is called the Second Vatican Council from the 1960s that created a theological agreement with pluralism and the idea that wisdom and salvation can be found in other religions except Catholicism. So that is one thing that you have to keep in mind always. Who am I talking to? Okay, but on a more personal and philosophical level, I would like to say that one problem I have with, so I mentioned that we have a large immigrant and Muslim population in Sweden, and that is reflected in my classes. And once again, I would like to remind you that that is an example of the endless possibilities that Maulana remind us of. Hence, Muslims do not have to engage in violent activities of any kind. They are, like everyone else, allowed in the state-sponsored free higher university education. So 10 to 15% of my students are Muslims. And we have, like I told you, we have these long classes where I introduce Islamic history leading up to the contemporary times. And I always mention that what Maulana reminded us of, that there is agreement between earlier revelations and prophets and the revelations of Prophet Muhammad. There is agreement. So I say that one basic category of Islam is that we separate between the Nabi, the Prophet, and the Rasulullah, those who brought forth scripture, like Moses or Jesus, Isa. So when I say that, the Muslims in my class, they protest and say, no, only Muhammad was a Rasulullah. And I say, oh no, okay, let's do this again. Moses, and there are a certain number of Quranic scholars, and I don't dare to say anything about the Quran, but please correct me if I'm wrong. Moses is the most mentioned person in the Quran. And Isa is so important for Islam. And still there is this Muslim perception that no, it is the Prophet Muhammad who matters. So one thing that you can do if you want to engage with Christians is to educate Muslims about this foundation of what we have in common. Dawood, David, Musa, Moses, Isa, Jesus, and the Prophet Muhammad. And I will do my best from my part to say that in what way is the message of the Prophet Muhammad in coherence with the message of Moses and Jesus. And then the philosophical part. That is based in my experience as a teacher. The philosophical part would be, and you don't have to agree with me. No one has to agree with me, by the way. So, in Christian theology, Jesus, I mean, you all heard the concept. Jesus is the Son of God. But what is actually there in the Greek text is that Jesus is the incarnation of the Word of God. In the Greek text, logos. Logos. Now that's a strange concept, logos. It is related to logic, but it's not the same thing. Logos. So the Christian main idea is that the divine is present in the world. So what I teach my students is that you cannot compare Jesus and the Prophet Muhammad. You must compare Jesus with the Word of God, the Quran. That is because that is the way that the transcendent God is present in the world, according to Christian doctrine and Muslim doctrine. And of course, I would like to add then that makes that it is actually Mary who can be Maria, who can be compared to the Prophet Muhammad, because Mary is the vessel that brings forth the Word of God, the Logos, into the world. Now in Christian doctrine, she is the Virgin, hence she could not have affected the Logos. She has not have any effect on bringing the transcendent God into the world. And in Muslim doctrine, the Prophet Muhammad was an analphabet. He couldn't read or write. That means that he could not have affected the revelation. It is not by his own will or understanding. He has only received it like a vessel. So that is something that I think that we could be reminded of. But even, on an even more philosophical level, I think actually, and I think the brilliance of the Western civilization is, on the one hand, the agreement that the divine is somehow present in the world, through the Logos. But there's also something else, because the Logos is also associated with Greek philosophy. That is the Enlightenment that leads to science and technology. And that is what Maulana highlighted. He wanted to engage with how the Word of God is relevant and a part of Logos as enlightenment, argument, rational thinking, critical thinking, science and technology. So, continue to highlight the relationship between the presence of the divine, the potential presence of the divine, the science of the divine in creation.
Okay, thank you.
And the rational part of the Logos, that leads to the science and technology.
Thank you, Dr. Mattias, for that elaborated answer. We have to move on to the next session, but I quickly ask you 2-3 more questions. There's a follow-up question from Professor Farida Khanam, and she has asked that have your efforts been successful in making Swedish Muslims to understand better how to live in a pluralistic society with a spirit of tolerance and patience?
Not enough. Not enough. Because but I think it's a slow process. And what is interesting is that I told you about those Muslim students in general in my classes, but there is a large number of Muslim students who seek to become religious education teachers. So I think we have to think about it in the long term here. Because I think that those Muslim students who are students today who will in 5 years, in 10 years be teachers and therefore be role models for young Muslim second and third generation immigrants in Sweden. That is the long-term effects. And I'm thinking a lot about how to do this in a different way and how to climb out of the famous academic ivory tower and not settle in that ivory tower. Well, this is just a thought I'm having, but I'm thinking about starting a YouTube channel.
Right.
And have lecture series based in my teaching and research. And my first lecture series would be the thought of Maulana Wahiduddin Khan.
Inshallah.
That's what I really would like to do.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Yeah. Dr. Mattias, we all witnessed, your emotions, flow of emotions during the talk, especially when you mentioned about Maulana Wahiduddin Khan. So I wanted to know if there is any particular experience, any example that you would like to share during your interactions with Maulana during your research period.
That is, I would like to exaggerate again, that engaging with Maulana was gripping. It excited me. And I believe that his entire life was thinking about these issues. And I think that why it was gripping to me was that he was actually logical. He actually had answers to my questions because he had actually thought them through. And as a person who has spent countless sleepless nights figuring things out or waking up in the middle of the night thinking about something, okay, I can being in part of a debate or an argument, that was something that I appreciated very much. And he had somehow found contentment, I think, in reaching his basic conclusions. And that is something that I understand now that I'm growing older, that that is something that I'm finding more and more as well. And once again, why is logic and ideas gripping? Why does it move someone? Well, I think that it points upwards. Logic and ideas can turn us to truth. And that is an aspect of the divine. Now, there are many aspects of the divine. Love, beauty, fairness, righteousness, justice, sabr, of course. But one aspect is also truth. And I think that is a psychological dimension of how people are differently wired. Some people are just oriented towards ideas and logic. And those people will be inclined towards the ideas of Maulana.
Thank you, Dr. Mattias. One last quick question.
All right.
Any message that you would like to give to all the CPS members who are spread all over the world?
That would be what I would, if I had the ability to torture you more and have my full 3-hour lectures that I usually give my students, that would be to, well, there is an academic trend, especially in the US, and it's a part of something that is called postmodernism. And postmodernism is a 1960s French radical philosophy that challenges all knowledge, that challenges all concepts, and says that there is no such thing as knowledge. There is no such thing as an objective position. And they are very critical against Western civilization. And everything is due to colonialism and the white man's oppression of everyone else, especially categories like women, everyone who is non-white, including Muslims. And that is a basis for violence, because it's based on essentially Lenin, Vladimir Lenin, the founder of the Soviet Union. That is based in his philosophy and ideology. And you will, especially in the US, you will encounter this philosophy. And don't be dismayed by it. Don't be dismayed by it. Don't be convinced by the relativist positions. Remember what the ideology of Maulana, who highlighted the importance of science and the contribution of the Western civilization in the fields of science and technology. He always said, he had this very humble way of describing people in his life. When he introduced some of the people of the CPS, he said, they are my teachers. This is my teacher. I would like you to meet so-and-so. This is my teacher. And he also had that idea about British colonialism that was, he said that, okay, the British civilization had something to teach. But the idea about postmodernism, and sometimes it's called also critical race theory and postmodernism, is the idea that anything that is bad in the world is due to Western civilization, the patriarchy and the tyranny of the white man in relation to everyone else. And there's nothing good about Western civilization. And I think that's wrong. I think it's dead wrong. And I think it's dangerous. So when you, from a Muslim, Islamic perspective, encounter these ideas, remember that science does not belong to anyone, and it is an equal part of, can be an equal part of Islam, just as it is with Western civilization. And once again, don't be afraid. Always stand up to being Muslim and to point to the divine. So you have a way to the divine through your religion and through the thought of Maulana. So never hesitate, and never hesitate to be positive. Never give in to the hate and fear in the world, the darkness of the world, the dark times that we're going through now.
Dr. Mattias, on behalf of CPS family, our heartfelt thanks to you on making a long journey from Sweden to India on this important day. We are truly grateful. Thank you. And we won't let you go like this. We would like to honor you with the CPS certificate. And I would request Dr. Sania Snein Khan and Professor Farida Khanam to come on to stage to honor you with the certificate. Thank you. I'd like to read what's there on the certificate. It says the CPS certificate is presented to Dr. Mattias Dahlkvist, Sweden, for delivering a talk at the CPS International Peace Conference on April 2023 at New Delhi, and in appreciation of his efforts towards peace, dialogue, unity, and mutual cooperation. Signed by Professor Farida Khanam, Chairperson CPS International, Dr. Sani Snein Khan, Secretary CPS. I will request them to Thank you, Dr. Mattias. Thank you so much.